Okay, I think probably the best place for this discussion to start would be, what has been your relationship with the Islamic world, especially October 7th and post October 7th?
Yeah. So for me, I always had Islam on the back burner or something. You meet Muslims, it's another religion out there. I think after October 7th, a very deep question I was asking. I've always got lots of friends who are very involved in politics and stuff. Is what options is I'll have forward? It seems always there's three bad options. Occupation is a bad option. One state solution is a bad option. Two state solutions is a bad option. So each of them, you don't want to be occupying other people. It's a horrible thing to be doing at best. It's corrosive for yourself. It's resource intensive. It's just horrible. At the same time, a two-state solution, which will be taken over by radicals sitting, a lot of people don't realize how tiny Israel is. I explain this to people. It's like 9 miles wide without the West Bank. Every population center is down a hill from where Hamas could be a charge. And a one-state solution in the Middle East is just two populations, antagonistic populations living in one state, just becomes a civil war of proportions one could never imagine. So they're all bad options. So what do? You got three bad options.
We're in a pool of bad options.
A pool of bad options. So you could say, look, that there is, I think it was Tommy Lapid, who was the politician, I think, said, we have this Aristotelian view of every problem needs a solution. Some just need to be managed. So you could say, look, state of Israel's managed with all these bad options. It's grown, it's thrived. Let's just keep going. But if you want to think, I think you have to start thinking, this is what my thought became. You have to think more creatively. What is currently on the fringe that could move to the center? So you got crazy ideas. I could list a few of them. But one of them that seems, well, I'll tell you roughly what some of the others are. One is, if you're going to ever run a two-state solution, how can you have enough land to be safe? Right? You can't sit with a 9-mile strip. But what about land reclamation from the sea? Now, there's no technology now that can allow Israel to grow 30 kilometers into the Mediterranean, but there wasn't an Iron Dome 20 years before there was one.
Interesting. So that is interesting.
Right. So you can.
I've never heard that theory yet.
I'm not saying it's feasible, but at least people should ask the question: what would it take? Is it a horizon technology? Okay, that's one. Two is, what would it take to have a much larger Jewish population, which would potentially make a one-state solution more feasible? So there's all these people out there who are Jewish but might not know it, or have stories that Jewish tribes. Is that worth exploring or not? But to me, the most interesting is option 3, which is, what does peace look like between Jewish people in the Islamic world?
That's true.
And that's where I started, well, let me do some reading. I know what I think Islam says. I know what I hear Muslims say. And I can go online and see a few things there, but try and get a deeper understanding. And what is it that drives the conflict from an Islamic point of view? And what possible solutions are there? So that's kind of where I started. And there were some shocks and surprises. What was less surprising to me is, or took me a little time to discover, is that so many of them view the world as Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. So you'll be familiar with this, been over on Watching World, that you got the lands of peace and the lands of war. And in more jihadi mindsets, the idea of a non-Islamic state inside the old caliphate is like, whoa, if there wasn't a single refugee, even if hadn't been a single person die in any conflict, this would be an anathema. It has to be destroyed. And that began the conflict.
Yeah.
That was Mufti Muhammad Amin al-Husseini. That was his ideology.
For a lot of people who don't know too, like, once Islam conquers a land, like, a lot of people believe that the whole region of Andalusia in Spain is holy Islamic land.
Right.
And that is the Dar al-Harb.
Right.
Like, until it becomes Dar al-Islam.
Right.
Until they're able to actually liberate that back from the Europeans, from the Christians, and make that a place of worship for the Muslims again. Because at some point, that was an Islamic or part of the Islamic Caliphate. I think what's interesting about what you were saying is that, like, since October 7th, we've all been really exposed to this narrative from the Islamic world of, we lived in peace.
Yeah.
We lived in peace. There was peace between Jews and Muslims until Israel came around.
Yeah.
And I always try to push back on that because, like, I'm not going to pretend like my whole life I knew exactly what the Mizrahi Jewish diaspora went through in Islamic lands. But it's become apparent since October 7th that isn't the truth. And what does coexistence between Jews and Muslims look like in 2025? Does it look like what we had before 1948 in the 1700s? in the 1600s, because back then, Yemeni Jewish populations had to wear Jewish stars to signify that they were Jewish.
Yeah.
Because that throws you back to something in Europe. There were Moroccan Muslims who massacred Jews in the 50,000s.
Yeah.
In like the 1800s and the 1700s.
And at various other phases before.
So what does peace actually look like with Islam for Jewish people? Does it look like what it looked like back then, or do we need to, as Jewish people and as Muslims, come together and re-envision what peace looks like?
Right. So that's the sort of line I was thinking. Now, I should say that as someone who came from a European Jewish story, that I think in Europe, most Jews would have loved to move to an Islamic country.
Maybe, yeah.
And yes, there are definitely a lot of it. It's like there's not one relationship between Muslims and Jews.
Correct.
In those lands. There were times, Yemen particularly suffered a lot. In Morocco, sporadically, but could be horrific massacre.
It ebbed and flowed. It was always up and down.
And you had lots, and I think it's fair to say, and it's very fair for both Jewish and Muslim and anyone else viewers, that there were huge amounts of times where Jews, yes, somewhat second class, but not very second class. And lots of Jews had a really, really good time in Muslim countries, or, that little bit of being a bit second class wasn't like a disaster. And there definitely are models of coexistence.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The second thing, which is within the Islamic world itself, once they lost Spain, there was a whole jurisprudential reevaluation of what the definition of Dar al-Islam has to be. There were many Muslims, because theoretically a Muslim can't live in a non-Dar al-Islam land or a Dar al-Harb land. But many scholars said, well, if a country tolerates Islam and allows a Muslim to practice there, it's also called Dar al-Islam. And that's to some then said, hey, we don't need to reconquer. So you got both views. And what I was not aware of was that, I don't know if you were aware of this, was that when Sadat made peace, he actually went to the Al-Azhar University in Cairo, and basically the head imam there had to write him a fatwa as to, or he asked him, is it permissible to make peace with Israel? And he wrote a multi-page detailed fatwa going through all the logic of why it is permissible to make peace with Israel.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a wow. A lot of people don't know.
So based on Islamic law.
Based on Islamic law, there was permission to make peace with Israel. And it was justified on two fundamental principles. I'm not an expert on Islamic law, but what I understood, number one is because Israel is a country that tolerates Islam and allows Muslims to practice freely. But number two was that if treaties are made between a Muslim ruler and non-Muslim for the sake of the benefit of the Muslim, then that can override other considerations.
Interesting.
Very interesting. In fact, what's less well known as well, I think, is that after September 11th, al-Qaradari, who was the Brotherhood, by the way, rejected this whole approach. And he, who was the big scholar of the Muslim Brotherhood, was living, I think, in Qatar at the time. He wrote a whole legal ruling, basically, that because of the United Nations, the whole world was considered one big treaty, and therefore all Muslim countries now have to accept non-Muslim countries as well, except Israel.
Wow.
Israel's the one country they have to destroy. So this is like a whole, that's one world that we're in. And then you throw on top of that the fact that humans are prone to narratives, and we're always prone to evaluate conflicts on one side. And even if there wasn't high death rates and casualties, we can always narrate every conflict. And any human can do this. Once you get into one side of a conflict, you can 100% narrate it so that you're the good guy and you never do wrong, and they're the evil people and they do all the wrong. And you empathize deeply with the emotions of the fear or the suffering or the pain of your side. And this can be true in a marriage that's falling apart. It can be true in a community falling apart. It can be true in a family falling apart on inheritance. It can be true in national levels. It can be true in political, and it can much more so be true in a war. That everything your side does is well-intentioned, and if bad happens, it's a fringe, and it's not this, and it doesn't represent, or it was self-defense, and everything the other side does is evil. And when you throw in social media to that mix,
oh yeah,
and you throw a groupthink, and you believe everyone's telling you you're right, and you just really can create the most toxic poison that any universe has ever seen.
And we're seeing this continuation today. I mean, I think for a lot of us, it's been clear that it's outside forces that are sort of propelling the different agendas in this war to keep us divided.
Yeah.
But this is the reality that I see from the Jewish side or the Israeli side very frequently. I was having this conversation last night with a friend. I don't think people really understand how much we love the other side. Like, maybe even a lot of Israelis and Jews don't process it, but I can speak like on my personal behalf. There's a lot of love there for Arabs, a lot of love for Muslims in general.
Yeah.
And I do see that resonating from the Jewish side often. Like maybe there's a fear complex there, but you see even, we're on the back end of this whole crazy Trump deal about maybe moving the Gazans outside. You see like half the Jewish world extremely divided about the fact that this might happen. Like our hearts are with our enemies 24/7. I think that's what makes it so special to be a Jewish person in this thing, is like you have this insane amount of compassion continuously for people who want to kill you over and over again.
Right. So that was exactly my question. Like I often get this asked on social media, and I'm a small player. You're like a big league guy, but sometimes I'll put things out there, and you get this torrent of abuse. And I rarely speak about Israel. It's not one of my main topics because people do it better than me. But I speak about Judaism, but you get, and then between all the abuse stuff, you get people who are clearly asking sincere questions. Just this week, I got a few people ask me what Jews think about Islam. And I write back the truth. I would say we have huge respect for Islam. Like these are people who believe in the same God that we do. That they serve the God, Allah, Hashem, who we love and adore. They love and adore. There's something very moving when you see somebody love the same obsession of life that you have the same love for. And they're passionate, they give charity, they're modest, they're dealing with many of the same struggles we're dealing with. And biblically, they relate themselves back to Ishmael, and we relate to Yitzchak. And Yitzchak and Ishmael have a tension in their family. It's actually not theirs. It's from the generation before, from their mothers. But they reconcile. And not only do they reconcile, but the Torah describes Ishmael at the end as tzaddik, as a purely righteous individual. And that is our vision. I think that's the way we look that way. So we have this, and it's very interesting because we see ourselves as Jews, as what's the Jewish religion is actually a broad universal religion. We call it the covenant of the Bnei Noach, the Noachites covenant. Now Muslims have a very similar narrative. They talk about a universal religion, it's the Deen of Islam, which is the same basic thing, belief in one God. I always think it's Achilles, the Muslims saying Adam was a Muslim and Noah was a Muslim. And
they drive me a bit crazy when I hear that, to be honest.
Why does it drive you crazy?
Because like my problem with it is it's almost like colonizing a belief system. Like I think as Jews we can both agree that definitively in the Torah it doesn't say Avraham Avinu was a Jew, wasn't a Yehudi. He was a believer in God, one God,
right.
the God that we share with Muslims and that we technically share with Christians too, even though that stuff kind of gets a little muddled.
Okay,
but the idea of retrospectively going back and changing everybody in the canon to a Muslim, in the context that a Muslim is today, is I think it's really damaging because it removes us from the land.
Oh, so that's and this was always my issue. What they think they kept the Quran, and I know this sounds ignorant. It's only relatively recently I realized they don't mean they were Quranic Muslims.
Correct.
They mean they were servants of God.
But that discrepancy isn't made, and that's the dangerous part.
Maybe, but this is what I'm saying. There's lots we can talk about dangerous. So this was what's interesting to me is that when we talk about what we feel, right, the respect that we have. To me, one of the most painful things of this conflict is that not maybe the crazy radical fringe, but the normal average Muslim and Jew could and should be allies in the world, not to the exclusion of other people, right? Part of the beauty of believing in a Noachide covenant and that God then has a special covenant with us is it doesn't exclude others. They can have different covenants or different pathways or different ways of being Noachides, right? So that's something, Jewish sources don't necessarily have an enormous amount to say how everybody should be serving God. We've got the basic principles of ethical monotheism, and all who fall under that are in some level or another fulfilling God's will. But the fact that we've turned into feeling each other's enemies is a very, very painful thing. That's at least my sense and my experience of it.
Yeah.
And I also see when you look at what European Jews went through and what it's done to who we are today, that the rigidity of either being very religious, anti-religious, you're assimilating, you're heavy reactionary. Whereas Jews who are in Muslim countries, yes, there was a lot of pressure under colonial stuff in the last, century or so before 48, but basically speaking, were very natural with their religion.
Mm-hmm.
Very much. And I tell you, when I traveled once to Morocco with my wife, and she said to me, I actually feel really comfortable here in an Arab country. So there's this whole other side of things that made me think and look deeply as to what is it that's gone wrong or what could go right. And here I'll tell you, I discovered something very, very fascinating. So a huge part of the big tension is most Muslims today believe, they look at the Quran. The Quran has some nice things to say about Jews, some horrible things to say about Jews, lots of good things to say about our prophets. And then there's this whole issue of Jews who corrupted the Torah. And this occurs more even, I think, in many of the hadith. And so you got good and you got bad. And how do you put that together? And there's a modern way of putting it together, which is, yeah, God wants like these Bnei Israel and he really invested in them, but they were really terrible. And they just kept killing prophets.
Keeps reminding you of the golden calf over and over
Right,
again.
the golden calf.
Surah Al-Baqarah.
Right, Al-Baqarah, yeah. And how evil the Jew, and they have this, and they killed all their prophets and didn't listen to the rabbis and rejected everything. And every time it talks about Jews who corrupted the Torah, that's all Jews. And the modern view is that, or at least it's not the only view in Islam, but it's probably the dominant view. It is the dominant view amongst Muslims, is that the Torah we have today is a corruption.
Correct.
And therefore, anything nice about Jews doesn't really apply to us, right? And therefore, our best, if we're lucky, we should be the Al Kitab, and that's good, and we should accept dhimmi status and pay a jizya, and hopefully that's good. But there was a different view in the early centuries of Islam, and I mean, there's different scholars debate and stuff, but if you just read the Quran by itself and had a bit of historical context, who were the Jews in Arabia exactly at the time?
The Bnei Quraysh, no?
Bnei Quraysh is one group. There's a few. All the tribes that, amazingly enough, are never mentioned in the Gemara. Now, the Talmud is finished being written 100 years before Islam. They never mention them. We have one mention of a Jew from Tayman, Shimon HaTaymani. You have all the time Jews from around the areas. We know where the Jews of Iraq all lived. We know the Jews of Israel. We know what was going on. And the simple answer is they were not rabbinic Jews. The Arab tribes were almost for sure not rabbinic Jews. That means to say that they rejected rabbinic interpretation of the Torah. Not only did they reject it, they were using Septuagint, which is a corrupted version of Torah, which in at least one important place in the prophets, when it talks about bowing down to Hashem, takes out the bowing down, which is a complaint Muhammad has against it. Then you have the fact that if you don't have the Talmud and you read the Torah, it looks very critical of all the prophets. Once you put the Talmud in, yes, they make mistakes, but they're subtle mistakes. These are not blatant sins. And then you look at what the Quran is criticizing these Jews for, changing the text of the Torah, right? There's even a hadith in Sunan Abu Dawud, I forget my Arabic's useless, Abu Dawud, where Muhammad is asked by the Jews about an adulterous situation. And he asks them to bring the Torah, and he actually uses the line, I swear by you and he who revealed you, or I have belief in you and he who revealed you. But this is very clear that he asked them what's the penalty, and they cover it up. The Jews don't want to say what the penalty is, and it's to do with 4 witnesses and the whole language there about if you see like an eyeliner in a container, right? As you have to see the explicit act. And then there's a death penalty, and he says, why don't you follow it? Now, this is not the written Torah. This is the oral Torah. This is Mishnah and Talmud. So you see very clearly Muhammad was pushing them to, these were non-Talmudic Jews, he was pushing them to follow. They follow the prophets, got to follow the rabbis. And you see this again and again. That expression, by the way, is exactly Talmudic. The 4 witnesses, you have to have 2 for the original warning, let's say, and 2 for the act. They could actually be the same ones. But that's where all of this clearly is coming from. And again, this whole line in the Quran that we told the Bnei Israel that he who saves a life like he saved the world, he'll destroy. That's the Talmud. So in the Surah Al-Baqarah, she quoted before, the idea of God hangs the mountain over the head, that's the Talmud. So it's not just Torah, it's everything that the rabbinic Jew would call Torah, Muhammad is saying you should keep. And these guys are running away and rebelling and doing everything wrong. And he's telling them off. So in historical context, essentially, he was very pro-authentic Jewish believers.
So in layman's terms, basically, this is really interesting. Muhammad's experience with the Haliji and Hijazi Jews,
yes,
was a experience with Jews who had essentially dabbled in corruption, or a corrupt version of Judaism,
yes,
at least according to rabbinic Judaism.
Yeah.
And he's basically making a commentary in the Quran about these Jews that he's seeing.
Right. And he's also linking it back to Jews of the first temple who were against the prophets. As he's saying, these Jewish people have a big pro and anti people amongst them. And in the tribes amongst me, people are not being authentic to what God wants them to be. That's, I think, the simplest way to read the Quran once you put that piece in. And you see it in many of the hadith. And he himself wanted to build a community of believers. Right, and the famous Surah Al-Ma'idah 548, right, where he says, Allah could have made it that there's just one religion, and instead he made it, different Sharia, different manhaj. Now, again, modern interpretations will say, no, that means at different points in history. But the natural way of reading that is certainly that you can have one deen, but multiple sharia. So you could have one faith, right? The faith of monotheism, the faith of true belief in one God. And then within it, Torah of Musa, of Moshe could still be right for the Jews. And I'm bringing the pagan tribes to me. And in my lands, I'm the authority, and you have to accept that, right? Whereas lots of Jewish tribes at the time didn't accept it because they believed they didn't accept this Noahide principle.
You know, amongst, I was recently with a Syrian friend, a Shami friend from Damascus, who he told me in Syria, the Muslims would refer to them as the Jews as Musawi.
Right.
Yani Jews or people of Moses.
Right, people of Moses.
Which is funny because they would make that distinction. Like, I don't think they would call themselves like Muhammadiyans or something like that, but they would make the distinction to refer to the Jews as Musawis.
Right.
Literally referring to Moses as their prophet.
Right. And I think, so and that really, now you see, I'm sorry, I forget the name, but there was even a question asked of an early Muslim legal scholar of, can you touch a Sefer Torah, an actual Torah scroll, with impure hands? And he writes back, there's different options. There are those who believe the Torah is corrupt, in which case it's impure anyway, or those who believe it's been superseded. But there's another opinion that would say you actually have to touch it with holy hands, which means it's not corrupt and not superseded, at least for Jews. Meaning that Muslims were dealing with this question of, is the Torah still intact as it sounds like it is, if the simple reading of the Quran and the Hadith, for those who don't have it corrupted, you got Ibn Abbas saying God's books can't be corrupted. So you got a Torah that's not corrupted. You got the authentic original vision. This is the one that Muhammad himself said he swears by and believes in, the one who revealed it. He saw an original version. And we know what the original version in Muhammad's time was. We know there was a Septuagint used by those guys, but we know the mainstream version, our version, was around in those days. There's Dead Sea Scroll versions of it. So this is really a sacred book. So Muslim scholars are dealing with this question in the early years, and there's a whole different attitude. And by the way, you see that reflected in Jewish texts, because Jewish texts write and have a reverence for Islam in the early years that they don't in the later years. They have some respect for it still, but not the same way the early years did. Because I think in the early years, they literally saw them as allies. These are like Noahites. These are like people spreading monotheism and people respecting us, that we should be keeping the Torah properly. And we're all part of the same belief in Hashem, a belief in Allah.
Same sort of monotheistic family.
It's the same family, right? And for us, that made sense. We understand this means that we are meant to keep the Torah. That's the bris that we have, the covenant we have with Hashem. And you're meant to be monotheist, and you can do that in your way, however you want to, however you feel the revelations come to you, whatever. That's not our issue. Our issue is it's the Noahide law, and it sounds like you're doing it, and it sounds great, and everyone's happy, and this is all wonderful. And it's only when the Muslim world starts shifting very strongly into this, no, your Torah is corrupt, that we're like, the Torah is that's heretical. That's nonsense.
Correct. When it starts getting flipped back onto us,
right,
to see us as some sort of heretic or some sort of reformist,
right?
When in reality, like, there is a lot of proof, both historical and biblical, that proves that Jewish people have been practicing, at least in a somewhat linear way, the same beliefs for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah.
Very long. I want to shift this conversation a little bit into a holistical direction.
Okay.
To talk about purpose. And I want to pose you a question as a rabbi. I'm really interested in getting your opinion on this. I was recently talking to a friend who posed to me that the purpose of Palestinians, or the purpose of the Islamic world's aggression towards Jewish people at the moment, a lot of it has to do about chizuk for Jewish people, about reminding us to be better. And again, this is like way less logical. In a sense, this is more spiritual, this conversation. But like, how do you feel about them and the makot that we sort of get from the Muslim world on a consistent basis now, as being a reminder for us to do better, for us to get closer to Hashem, for us to get closer to our purpose as Jewish people?
Wow. I love that question. I actually said, I spoke recently, and I was very in two minds whether to say what I'm going to say, because I think it could be badly misunderstood.
Okay.
So I apologize now to anyone watching this if it's going to be misunderstood.
Controversy is good. It's always good.
So what I said is, like, we do talk a lot about anti-Semitism. We talk, and we're right. We're sensitive to the fact that we don't get treated fairly by the world, and never have been. And some people are like, oh, it's because of the state of Israel. If we didn't have a state of Israel, we wouldn't be treated fairly.
Absolutely.
Somebody's like, it's because you were moneylenders. First of all, Europe Jews were often forced to be moneylenders. But even if it's not like when the Italian banking families took over from Jews that suddenly anti-Semitism ended and everyone hated Italian banking families. No, now we understand it's a part of an economy. You need to lend money. Then we were in ghettos. Now we hate the people at the bottom of society who are creating illnesses. Then we get out of just get out of the ghetto or treat. Now we come out of the ghetto. Oh, now you're taking over. So all things in the opposite of reason for anti-Semitism, and we focus on that, and it's true. I said to somebody that I'll say it to you, that if an alien came down from another planet and wanted to understand what is the most important issue facing humanity from humanity's point of view, I'm going to say they did you. But it's amazing. If you go to the United Nations and they were to just study spend 10 years, any 10-year period in the UN, let's take before this war, just take 10 years. And there's been a resolution once or twice about global warming, so that must be important. Right? There's out of 100 resolutions, 2 of them about that. There's some resolutions about famines. So famines are, right. And then you go through one. Oh, there's about 50 wars going on at one time. There'll usually be 2 or 3 resolutions. There's one issue that dwarfs all of the others put together. 67% of every single United Nations resolution is about one group. The Jews.
It's crazy.
It's great. They're the most important. So you would sense that the most important issue on planet Earth is the Jews. If they just behave differently, the world would be perfect. Now, pause there. As Jews, we're like, yeah, you see, so that means that we're terribly mistreated, then we can't trust anything the UN says or this. And that's all true. But it's like when a child, 3-4-year-old kid cries at their parent. I'm not talking about abusive parent, God forbid. A normal, healthy parent. The kid says, I hate you, daddy. I hate you, mommy. And your first instinct, and then you guys want to say, shh, that's not what they're saying. Those are the words that what their conscious brain is saying. What's really going on is, daddy, mommy, I need you. And you're not doing for me what you're meant to do.
Right.
You're failing in your role to me. And I'm going to feel that consciously as a resentment. And I'm going to look, and it's because you're, I hate you. Right. And so as Jews, we get very caught up in the conscious layer of the conversation. And by the way, we should always be open to criticism because there's definitely things we can do wrong. Of course, after every war, you have to have an investigation to every action that took place. If one civilian was killed that didn't need to be, that law needs to come down on our, like a ton of bricks, right? As it should do. At the same time, we know that the stuff that's hurled at us is ridiculous. Okay, but don't listen to the conscious layer. Just repeat that story. The world is saying, Jewish people, we need you. You have a role to play and you're not playing it. If it was articulated, wouldn't that resonate so deeply?
I think it's something like, personally, specifically through this war and a couple of years prior, when it became unlocked to me, truly that we as Jews haven't been living our full purpose. And come on, there's a lot of great Jews. I would say an overwhelming amount of Jews are great people that I encounter every day. Like, I have nothing but love for Am Yisrael. But we all know somewhere collectively down inside we're not living up to our true purpose.
Like,
we're still lost. We're still diasporically confused.
Yeah.
Considering half of our population also lives in the diaspora.
Yeah.
How could we ever really be living up to our full purpose if we're not all united back in our ancestral land?
And if you look at what divides us, it's like we're trying to be another nation.
Correct.
And particularly a Western nation, right? And is that really what we're in the world for? Is that really why it was worth surviving 2,000 years of exile? That's not what God wanted from us, right? Take our own texts. And I don't want to get too religious, although I'm a very religious Jew and I believe all Jews should be religious, but leave me my personal views out. Let's talk now at a national level as a Jewish people, right? Is that God says to us at the very beginning, the word he tells Abraham, excuse my Ashkenazic pronunciation there.
It's all good.
You will be blessed, all the nations, all the families of earth. When we stand at Sinai, God says you should be Mamlechas Kohanim V'Goy Kodesh, right? And kingdom of priests. Now, in the ancient world, priest to most of it meant privilege.
Right.
In the Jewish world, it doesn't mean privilege. A priest is not allowed to own land. They can't have power. That's not who they're meant to be. They're there so that through them, spreading love and wisdom and teaching, the whole nation can achieve holiness.
So when I think about like what our purpose is, like I'm sitting here in the Aish World Center with you, looking out the window, I can see Al-Aqsa Mosque from over your shoulder.
Yeah.
I can see the Dome of the Rock. I would never want this spot to ever be anything other than a place for humanity. And that's what I appreciate so much about us, is that it's never been just about the Jews. Right? It's never been just about Am Yisrael. Even historically, and you probably know this better than me as a rabbi, like historically, Am Yisrael has always had people who have not been part of Am Yisrael living amongst us. Always.
Yeah.
Sometimes we've had better relationships, other times we've had worse relationships, but a lot of times the idea is to uplift the people around us, the whole concept of tikkun olam, the whole concept of, being a light. This city, there's no denying it. Even as much, I've had my bar mitzvah here. There's no denying as much access as you have it. There's something very, very special about being here, and denying the right for anybody to come and visit this place, to be in this place, to bathe in its juice, to be in it. It's denying humanity the ability to progress. We have, as Jewish people, this special spirit and tendency to be able to really, I don't want to say fix the world, because I think in English that kind of can be misconstrued as the world is a problem and we're here to fix it.
Right.
It's not about that. It's about improving. Like a rabbi taught me this years ago when I was in Yerushalayim on a delegation on a trip when I was younger. And he told me that the idea of a Jewish person existing and your neshama being taken away from you and reconnecting with Hashem, it happens when you fulfill your purpose. And that purpose can really only come when you've made the world a better place, when you've left the world a better place than what you were brought into it. And we don't always, as Jewish people, know what that means exactly.
No.
It could be in the smallest little things.
Yeah.
It could be that you just saved an ant that was crossing the street. You didn't step on it, and that was that. That's just a silly example, but it could be in the smallest, littlest things. But that every Jew doing their darndest to try to make that a reality. Imagine what we could bring on if we all inhabited that energy. We all had that in us.
And I would go even further. I would say that I think what you're saying is so beautiful and so profound and true. And I would say there's even a step further. Here we are, like it or not, we have a state, right? You could be the anti-Zionist, pro-Zionist. We're here, the Jewish people here. How should the state view itself? On the one hand, it's one of the most religious places in the world.
Right.
On the other hand, it's one of the most liberal, secular places in the world. It's got a whole avenue of total technology and innovation and craziness like that. And it's got another avenue of people who are literally living without materialism, just in a religious life of closeness to God. And you've got all this stuff going on. And you feel like it's different tribes. And the Jewish people were always different tribes.
Correct.
And the genius was when there was a way when King David could bring them together, and King Solomon, and they did it actually around a national project, part of which was building a temple. But it was a temple for all of humanity, and it was to create a vision for the whole world. And I think if we imagine the state of Israel all sat together and said, our mission statement is to be a blessing to the whole world. How do we take every component of our society? We've got Jews living here. We've got Arabs living here as equal citizens. We've got Haredi Jews, and we've got, secular Jews. We've got technological business community. And we're facing a future that is moving so fast.
So fast.
The next 30 years will have probably more scientific revolutions than the last 3,000 years. Or however far back you want to go. We're going to have, the last 30 years have had as many as the 150 years before then. We literally have been through an industrial revolution in our lifetime. And we're about to go through something of with quantum computation and AI, we're just at the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. So we're going to have a world that is so radically different to the world we're in today. We are people who've experienced, we have very deep memory of the past, but we've always lived in the future. Rabbi Sachs, who was Chief Rabbi of England, used to say, most societies have a golden age they can point to in the past. We've always had a golden age and pointed to it in the future. And it's an age when all of humanity becomes one and we all come together. So can we think collectively with all our different talent pools and all our different feelings and all our different energies, instead of fighting each other internally? How could we build this place so that every nation on earth is blessed? I mean, good if every country thought this way, but let's start by being the first to think this way, right? To really ask ourselves this question: what are we going to build here so that we were in exile for thousands of years? We've come back here to do something that every society on earth will say, I'm so glad they were here. Thank you. I've gained something from this.
You know what I think is the answer to that? I'd love to get your opinion on this. In a lot of ancient Far East religions, which obviously we don't practice, but there's this idea of duality, of yin and yang, of the white and the black, the dark and the light. In Hebrew and in Israel and in Judaism, we have it, but we don't process it in the same way. And I think since the beginning of the war, it's been really apparent. The concepts of avat chinam and sinat chinam. If we were to apply as Am Yisrael,
do you want to translate that?
Oh yeah, avat chinam meaning, I guess it means literally free love in a direct translation, but it more means just having a holistic love for everybody around you, specifically your fellow Jew. And sinat chinam is having hate for your fellow Jew or for the people around you. And that duality, processing or trying to make the avat chinam, the free love, the love that is overwhelming and that empowers over everything else, be the one that you lead with and that all of the people of Am Yisrael lead with, And yeah, we can still protest and we can angry at each other and we can yell at each other and we can have the rude bus driver and it can all exist. But as long as we lead with the concept of avat chinam, and I know without even talking to you about it, I know that when you and I see a fellow Jew, anywhere it is in the world, even if they're acting bad, there's love there. Like an immense amount of love that you and I can probably not explain.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how to process that. It's just something I've sat with. When I see a fellow Jew, it's like, what? It's my brother, it's my sister, it's my family.
Yeah.
And it goes back a very, very long time. And it's not something I can rationally explain. But if we could all lead with that kind of energy, imagine what we could do. And imagine the effect we could have on the nations around us.
Right. See, I was thinking it's a very interesting thing. What are we criticized for? Right. So obviously, if you look in the biblical books, right, every time you have to fight a war, it's criticized. Right. Even if you had to, even if it was defensive, even if there was nothing you could do. King David is told by God, you did all the right things, you got attacked, you had to fight back, but you can't build my house because you had to fight a war. Right. Joshua's told right at the beginning, Yeshua's told that two things: be chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous in war, but be strong and courageous in the Torah. And the implication running all the way through the book is the more you do things right spiritually, the less you'll have to be in a position where you're fighting wars. Fighting wars is a signal to us we're doing the wrong thing, even if it's with heroism and even if it's moral with 100% ethics and all the stuff. And the soldiers, you know, who risk their lives are great, great, great heroes. I'm talking people who behave ethically on the battlefield, which is 99.9%, and who risk their lives. I'm so, wow, what heroes. But the fact that we have to be fighting a war is not where we're meant to be. And that very brotherhood you mentioned, the mission in Pirkei Avot, the great ancient rabbinic teaching that teach about how we're meant to feel that love, like we're all literally children of one family under covenant of God. The line before that in the Mishnah is also Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem, how beloved are all human beings created in the image of God. And you have to have both. And this I want to tell you what I think is a legitimate criticism and illegitimate at the same time. Like all anti-Semitic criticisms, you get this whole thing. But doesn't the Talmud say only Jews are humans and the rest of the nations are animals? It's a complete misunderstanding of the Gemara. But it can subconsciously be something that hits us. What does the Gemara actually say? The Talmud actually says, it's like this. I'm not going to get into technical legal discussion. It's about laws of purity and impurity of graves and stuff. But it essentially, it says that there are four biblical words for human: Enosh, Gever, Ish, and Adam. Three of them always mean all human beings. The word Adam can flick back and forth as to whether it means all of humanity or just the Jewish people. Why? Because the word Adam relates to us in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, all of humanity was a single soul. And it failed and left Eden, and we're now on earth as shattered, broken fragments. Every human being walking this earth is like a piece of an Adam that sees the world through its eyes, that can naturally hate one another and be threatened, but is meant to heal and come together as one. And the purpose of the Jewish people is to do that first, internally, but with the dream of building a model that impacts all of humanity to all become one. Not all become Jews, but all become one. Under God, all become servants of one God and so on. But think, and that's what it means. Sometimes, therefore, the Torah, it doesn't mean you're called Adam and they're not human. God forbid. They're the image of God. But you're meant to be the humans of the future to help bring everybody else there.
It's almost like if we were a human body collectively, the Jews would be almost like the heart. We all need to come together to make that heart real.
Right.
And then the rest of the world can sort of follow us in our pursuit to bring together this body.
Right. But now think what it means. So a child can pick that up the wrong way and go, oh, I'm better. You know, amazing thing, in Judaism, we don't really have words for better and worse. In modern Hebrew, we have to put cognates, yoter, tov,
Right.
because there's nothing, God doesn't use language of better and worse. You've got a mission. You've got a role. Every nation may have a role. You've got a role as a Jewish people. It's a difficult role. It's a role that can involve a lot of persecution against you when you get it wrong and all this kind of stuff. But can't think about yourselves. Or the best way to think about yourselves as a family is, what am I doing to bring blessing to the rest of the world? That's what I was getting back to. And if the world's suffering, yes, you know, so anti-Semites will say, it's a Jewish conspiracy to make the world suffer. Remove the conscious layer. Do you realize on the subconscious layer, we're not a million miles away? We believe that the world's suffering, we've got to be doing something about it. Not that others don't have to do something about it as well. But so now imagine if the State of Israel gathered all its groups together, every faction, the Haredim, the religious Zionists, the secular, the creative business community and the Nobel Prize winners and the poets, the Arab community, the Jews, everybody you're back in Eretz. This is the people of, right? We always used to have Ger Toshav in the old days, right? People who are not Jews but live in the land. Fine, all of you together. What can we do to think forward into the future, to look around our world and bring a blessing? The minute you're thinking together with the same purpose, a lot of your fights disappear.
Right.
Because it's when you don't have mission and purpose that you're suddenly, well, maybe you'll take away from me and I'll take away from you. When we're building something together and we got a sense of who we are, and that sense is to give to others, the best way to bring, and it's like, like sometimes when you got a couple that are fighting, you say, but think about what you're going to give your children. And sometimes that can be a catalyst for healing, sometimes not. But when you're thinking about to bring a blessing to others, it's often easier to come together yourself, right? And that's a deep part of why I think we should not let anti-Semitism internalize like the abused person who starts to believe all the abuse. No, the conscious layer is nonsense. But let's get the signal from the world. Let's not just try to be like another nation, just we're back in this land, because all it's going to do is annoy people. It hurts or was wrong. He thought we can just build a normal nation here. The world is telling us, no, you're not going to have a normal nation here. We're not going to treat you the same, right? And when the Muslim world says you're godless people, okay, so we can, but let's hear, there's what, again, religious or secular, how everyone understands the idea that there's one God, one creator of all humanity. Its real implication is that means there's a force of love that loves every human being in this world and sees a world. What do you think the creator of all humanity wants? It to fight each other? What can we be to be that vision? I'm not sure I've given any, but this is my feelings.
No, I mean, the reality is that if we were to process the way that we interact with the world around us, and specifically the state of Israel, with that mindset in everything we do, and really try to inch closer to the truth of who we actually used to be, what we used to do. Because there's no denying that we live at a level, I mean, everybody will say this, we live at a level less holy than we did when we had the Beit HaMikdash first and second.
Yeah.
And like, how can we elevate? How can we take the spirituality of that place is right over there, which is crazy,
yeah,
into our every single day life? What can we do to channel that in? For example, in my personal life, I do it with music. When I learned that music was a holy thing in Judaism, and that it was a way that the Levitic choir used to, interact with God and praise God, and all of Am Yisrael would come together for it, I realized that when I'm making simple music, whether I'm playing my flute or my ukulele or an oud, it's serving a purpose of a higher consciousness, of God consciousness.
Yeah.
And if you do it with that mindset, you can bring some light into the world in the smallest of ways.
Yes.
In the smallest of ways. But I think maybe the problem is that us trying to deny who we are and trying to be like America, trying to be like Canada, trying to be like a Western democratic nation without the values of Am Yisrael inside of it. Yeah, you can just play an instrument and you're just playing the guitar.
Right.
But when you process it as a Jew, as a Yehudi, as Am Yisrael, every little action you take is bringing something into the world.
Right. And this a whole, if you look at the dynamics of the last few centuries, the world is starting to think a lot more globally as technology moves in that direction. But at the same time, in a Jewish world, we've had many revolutions of Pnimius Torah, of the deeper dimensions of Torah coming out, where you suddenly feel the infinity in every act you ever do. I would say, like in my own life, I can't help but feel history all the time.
Right.
Here we are, opposite. Our ancestors were marched out of this place, crazy, 2,000 years ago, in chains. Right? And I think how many of my ancestors were at some point given a choice, convert, die, or leave this country. And they chose either to die and hide their children or leave the country, because if they left Judaism, I wouldn't be here. And you just imagine that as they were being marched out of somewhere, losing everything they'd worked their whole life to build, and around them people dying on the journey and all the stuff. And they had a hope and they had a dream that the world was laughing at them for, that one day their children will be back in the land. And here we are. It's crazy, but they also had a dream, and they will bring the Messianic era, right? So, but also if you look in the Jewish people, God forbid to be critical, I mean, there are such beautiful things going on. There's a lot of good. Like, even if you look at last year's, the protests, people are fighting for, we want to make sure there's a strong court so there can be rights of minorities. That's a powerful thing. Even when it's good for us, we can't trample other people. That's a very noble, beautiful thing. Other people are saying, yeah, but there has to be the voice of the voices in the parliament. So you can't just have this part of the population votes. That's a beautiful thing. Yeah. There's, yes, we get very aggressive and your side's the evil of with.
We're Middle Eastern. Yeah, that's what we do. We are. Can't deny it.
Can't deny it.
We're a passionate people.
That's right. I'll tell you, somebody messaged me a beautiful message this week. It was another anti-Semite, but
What a optimistic outlook. That's a Jew right there. That's how I know you're Jewish.
yeah, right. So if they just post the Hitler things, I just delete them. But if they're sometimes you feel they've heard a lot of messages, but they actually want the conversation. And sometimes I get it wrong. Maybe I judge people wrongly, whatever. But this guy said to me, he said to me that he first put some comment and I actually replied and said, okay, I hear what you're saying on that point, but why is it you're overrepresented in banks and overrepresented in the whole Hollywood and whatever? And I assume his feeling was there must be some secret conspiracy or whatever. Yeah, imagine Jews like managing to have. Everyone knows Jews well, but the ability to control or organize. No Jewish.
Yeah, absolutely, and agree on things, right?
Exactly. But I said to him, I tell you what I think it is. Not just that, why they're overrepresented in arts, why they're overrepresented in, you quoted music, in literature, in poetry, in Nobel Prizes, right? I don't think Jews are more intelligent. I don't think it's those, or they may be on average as a relatively high IQ, but that's not what's going on. I said, in my view, I think that Jews are very, very driven. It's not easy for someone who's not Jewish to understand. It's almost like we have a subconscious spiritual side that says you're in this world to change the whole world.
Absolutely.
And you're in this world to connect to the infinite power of the world. And a Jew is driven. And when they don't know what they're driven for, they're driven mad. And they kind of, the conscious brain will look for how can I gain spirituality or that in the world? Not just for me, I've got to do it further and further. Not every Jew has it quite the same, but on average, a Jewish, so you could be 1,000th of humanity, you'll be 20% of whatever it is. But when you misfire and say the most important thing in the world is making money, you'll go crazy. Oh, got to be the banks. The most important thing is music. Oh, and you'll create this incredible music. The most important thing is being in social justice campaigns. Oh, and that will be the Jews in the social justice campaigns. That Jews are disproportionately represented in anti-Zionist movements. Right? They're disproportionately represented in everything. Because there's something sitting inside us saying you can't sit still. Now, a secular person might say it's experience of thousands of years diaspora. It doesn't matter what it is. That's the reality. It sits inside us, and it doesn't let us be like just settle in the world in an easy way.
Correct.
I think it's Matthew Arnold, who's a British writer, who wrote in Irony, the Jew is terribly ill at ease in Zion, meaning the Jew's not at ease in this world. They're very not at ease people, and it can freak people out a bit. That the energy is something weird about you guys.
We're neurotic, we always have something going on.
Right. But then you become Freud. I've got to study this. Oh, let me do this. Or you become Marx. Do you know how many people probably looked around Russia and said it's not fair that the underclass are downtrodden? But he went and blew the world. Here's an ideology. And so, the capitalist anti-Semites in Europe saying Jews are the communists, and the communist ones say, no, you're the capitalist. And there were lots of Jews in both. But that's this kind of, there's a power to that can be for the good. We are going to produce a disproportionate amount of technological innovations. We are going to produce disproportionate amount of moral movements. So that's what I say, if we synthesize this, and there's something sitting there waiting to produce a beauty that was worth thousands of years exile and all the terrible things we went through for.
And the one thing I can add on to that is that anybody who's watching this video who have their doubts, we're not going anywhere. We're here to stay. And this is like the nation of, we have testified throughout the ages, through every nation that's tried to wipe us out. And maybe that's a little played out and everybody hears this all the time. But truly, we both know if it ends tomorrow, we'll still be here. We're still going to be here. We're still going to be neurotic like this. We're still going to be driven. We're still going to be passionate in everything we do. And I truly only hope that we can actually usher in a new age of purpose and peace here in Israel.
Yeah, beautiful. But one thing I'll tell you an experience I had recently. Mm-hmm. This is so I was invited to go after this Bedouin family lost hostages in Gaza, and they lost 2 in the same family. So after their mourning period, which was 3 days, they asked if rabbis together with imams will come to them, and members of different faiths as well. And for some reason, I got invited to get down. I went down, and it was very, I've got a friend who's an imam, somebody I met recently, so I asked him what the right greeting is, and all that. But afterwards, we were invited to the main sheikh of Rahat. It's the town of Rahat, a Bedouin town down south. And it's very interesting speaking to imams there. And I had a fascinating conversation. I used to sit on interfaith panels in Britain, and they were the most boring thing ever. Because basically, like, the question was like, "What does your religion think about peace?" "Oh, Judaism is a religion of peace. Christianity is a religion of peace. Islam is a religion of peace." It was like it was all the boring platitudes, like, and you never got to beneath the surface to the real conversations. So after a while, when it felt like a bit of trust, because we have a lot in common that we can connect to. So I just said, I started saying, what do you really feel about the conflict? He said, we're very conflicted. We're torn. On the one hand, some Bedouin actually soldiers in the Israeli army, most aren't, but we've had hostages and we're, very angry at the Hamas and so on. And on the other hand, most of us have relatives who live in Gaza and they're going through suffering. So we're really torn. And we started talking more. And then he said an amazing thing to me. He said, "Do you know what? If it was people like you and people like me, we could make peace." And we hear that all the time. All the citizens can make peace. He said, I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "People of God." He said, "Do you know that all the emotions on both sides, religion is a very powerful force for overcoming natural emotions. In its negative, it can overcome empathy and make you quite horrible to other people. But in its positive, it can override your desire for revenge. It can override your desire to see the other as a threat. You can find a voice of religion can be very powerful in building peace." And he says, and the truth is, you want to make peace with the Muslim world, a secular politician in Israel is never going to have the same never going to have the same respect.
Yeah.
The head of the Mossad, they might respect his skills and ability, but there's a disrespect there. You put your rabbi in the room, not like me, the real, the long beard. You put the man of God in the room, and there's an immediate respect, even on the more radical parts that view as suspicion and so on. There's still a certain respect. You're a guy who prays. Amazingly, I said to him, he says, "We pray 5 times, you pray 3 times a day." We actually pray 5 times a day as well. 3 times in synagogue. There's the morning blessings at home and the Shema. We do at least 5 a day, plus when you eat. Okay, but we're all praying a lot. We're all, whatever criteria. So whatever criteria is, we each give lots of charity. We each bow to the same creator of the universe. There's a point where you put the men of God into the room, and you might get a different conversation going. It might not happen overnight, but at least as a side, of course, yes, the politicians have to ultimately take responsibility, and you can't substitute them having their own agreements, but bring them into the conversation. Because right now, back to our Muslim discussion, a young Muslim grows up with a hatred of us, right? At least many do. And many in their mind, because they also have this love-hate, want to split off Jew from Zionist, which is an interesting dynamic.
Not really possible.
It's not possible to do, but I think behind it, again, the little positives, but I want to still have a relationship with the Jewish people.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. Yeah. And also I always say to people, like, what does Zionist mean? I'm sure you do this all the time. So to a lot of Muslims, Zionist means kicking people out of the land to live there. I said, but I'd be an anti-Zionist, right? To me, Zionist means Jews have a right to live in the land and a right to independence in the land, without kicking anybody out. And then we can narrate and go through the whole story, or whatever. The point I'm saying is that I do think now that one of the best things about the Sephardim Mizrahi Jews coming to the state of Israel is there was this anti-religious tiny minorities, anti-religious majority, and then suddenly the Mizrahim turn up and no, we're actually a bridge. And we have a very strong relationship with God, but we, the secular can relate to us too, and we've got all this. And the state of Israel has become, for better or for worse, I'd say for better for sure, just say for better for worse, whatever your views are, the state of Israel has become more religious.
More religious.
Right? And it has lots of different pools. There's pools who don't serve in the army because they're religious, pools who do, and so on. But I think it's time for that voice to be sent to the world as well.
I used to, when I would promote Israel in my travel career, I'd always tell people, this is a secular country. But I realized over the years that actually it's the opposite of secular. We're an extremely godly people. But like you said, with the Mizrahis turning up in this country, they brought an element of cultural spirituality that wasn't necessarily practiced in the Jewish diaspora in Europe. And it brought an essence of spirituality in everything, even though you don't walk around and look like a religious person.
Right.
My grandfather in Iraq, he was shamash in the Knesset, but you would never think that he was a religious Jew.
Right.
But he's extremely spiritual because that it overcomes your exterior element.
Right.
If you try to solve the Israel-Palestine conflict, the Arab-Jewish conflict, without God, you've lost the plot.
Yeah.
God is here. God is deeply invested in the people of Palestine, is deeply invested in the people of Israel.
Yeah.
It's deeply invested in Arabs and in Jews.
Yeah.
We are godly people. If you try to do this without God, it's not going to work out.
More than that, you're ceding God to the fanatics. God will live in the mind of the terrorist. You gotta bring God into the mind of the one who wants coexistence and the one who wants to be able to live together. And more than that, I suspect that the Muslim world in general will have a lot more respect for a country that sees itself in service of God. And again, I'm saying that without scaring Israelis, without saying that means you have to become a religious country. The legal political structure of Israel as a liberal democracy does bring a lot of advantages. I happen to think with technology coming, we're probably going to see new political systems come, because that always happens. New technology brings new social organization, fine. But it doesn't, you don't need to change the parameters. On the contrary, I think religion is more powerful and has influence and less power.
Yeah.
Ironically.
Yeah.
I mean, it has more influence, I should say, when it has less power. That's, I think, Lord Jacobowitz, who was chief rabbi of England, once made that point. The more religion has power, often the more it loses influence. It doesn't mean the legal state has to become a religious state, but exactly as you say, when we're talking to our neighbors, when we're talking to the people who have the same passion for the land and passion for God, we have to bring God and the people of God into
Absolutely. You cannot remove the God out of the equation of Israel.
Yeah.
It's here.
Yeah.
It's here and you cannot remove it.
Yeah.
That was a lovely conversation, right?
Yeah, beautiful.
I really, really enjoyed that. I think if a lot of people open their minds and listen to what the two of us are saying, because we both come from different backgrounds, but in the end of the day, we're both Jewish. And I think we see eye to eye on a lot of things. I think if a lot of people were to listen to this, and I think I would like to encourage Muslims to listen to what we just recorded and expand their minds about the intention of the Jewish people and Israelis about what our purpose is. Is there anything else you want to add?
And yeah, I would say I'm sure there's lots of things people strongly disagree with. And I think that's fine and that's exciting and that's great. And what I would say is, as well as when you listen to what you disagree with, it's always good, I find, to try and listen to what do I agree with or what did I think differently to before as well. But I'm sure we'll get lots of criticisms and support in the comments. And that's great. That's part of, hopefully we've added something into the great conversation of humanity.
At the end of the day, it's all love. That's what it is. It's all love.